My adopted granddaughter rented a luxury apartment in New York using my name. She forged my signature, stole my identity, and lived lavishly, while I sat alone eating expired bread in a freezing room. If you think this is just another family story, you're dead wrong. Subscribe now to catch the next shocking episodes we bring to life. Under the thin hum of an old radiator, Edith Wells sat at her kitchen table with a chipped ceramic mug and a newspaper 3 days out of date. The Lower Manhattan apartment hadn't seen a fresh coat of paint in over a decade. Paint peeled near the ceiling where moisture crept in through the cracked frame of the kitchen window. Outside, the city moved in its usual blur, impatient, indifferent. Inside, Edith's world was quiet. At 74, Edith had grown used to silence. Her husband Richard had died 11 years ago from a stroke that came in the middle of his morning shave. There were no children, no nieces or nephews who called. Her phone rang only for 2 reasons: telemarketers who thought she still subscribed to Reader's Digest, and the community nurse who checked in every other Thursday. She adjusted her glasses and flipped through the mail. 2 electric bills, one marked Final Notice, a flyer for cremation services, and a grocery coupon that had expired a week ago. No letters, no invitations, no warmth, just paper deadlines and the unspoken pressure of being forgotten. She'd spent that morning walking 5 blocks to the only market that still accepted paper coupons without hassle: bananas, milk, canned beans, and a small pack of Earl Grey. She'd weighed the carton of eggs in her hand for 5 minutes before putting them back. They were 70 cents more than last week. Her knees ached from the cold, and the elevator had been broken for 2 months. The 4th-floor walk-up turned each grocery run into an expedition. Still, she hadn't complained to the landlord. Complaining meant someone cared enough to listen. The phone rang. Edith looked at it with suspicion. It was 2:43 p.m., and Nurse Florence never called this early. She considered letting it go to voicemail. Maybe it was another, "Congratulations, you've won a cruise," but something in her gut made her answer. "Mrs. Wells," a professional male voice asked. "Yes," she replied, her tone defensive by default. "My name is Carl Hendricks. I'm an attorney with Brightwell and Goldstein based here in the city. Do you have a moment?" She hesitated. "If this is about life insurance or—" "No, ma'am. I'm calling in regard to a property and apartment. Unit 9F, Parkview Heights, Upper East Side." Edith blinked. "What about it?" There was a pause. Carl's voice softened, assuming the tone of someone trained to deliver confusing news with clarity. "You are the legal owner of that apartment, Mrs. Wells. The deed was transferred to your name on March 14th, 3 years ago." She laughed. Not a chuckle, not amusement, an abrupt, startled noise like a bark. "Excuse me, it's an upscale condo. Market value currently estimated around $1.2 million. We recently completed an internal audit and saw your name flagged in our ownership database. We're confirming documentation and reaching out to validate your contact information. You should have received a copy of the deed at the time." "There must be some mistake," she said, her voice already fraying at the edges. "I've never owned anything on the Upper East Side. I've lived in this place since 1978. Are you sure you have the right Edith Wells?" Carl paused again. "I have here a notarized deed tax filings, a social security number, and a copy of your New York State ID, all matching your name, date of birth, and personal details. We also have bank documentation confirming regular rental income transfers to an account registered under your name." Edith swallowed. Her heart had begun to race, the pulse in her neck thudding against her scarf. "I don't have any rental income. I live off Social Security and a small pension." "Then someone may be using your identity without your knowledge," Carl said carefully. "Or perhaps there's been an internal clerical error, though. I must admit the documentation appears legitimate. If you're able to meet, I'd be happy to go through it with you in person." Edith hung up without saying goodbye. The room was suddenly too quiet, the world too loud. She looked down at her hands, veins beneath translucent skin, fingernails, trimmed flat knuckles worn from decades of dishwashing and typing and clinging to subway poles. Had she signed something without remembering? Was this dementia creeping in? She pushed the thought away. Her mind was sharp. She remembered the name of every student she ever taught, every grocery purchase she made last week. There were no gaps in her memory. But there was something else. A face. It came in a flash like headlights through fog. Blonde hair, green eyes, the slope of a familiar jaw. Lindsay. The name struck her like a slammed door. Lindsay Davidson, her late friend's daughter, the child she'd taken in at age 8 after that tragic drunk driving crash on the FDR. Edith had been her godmother, her emergency contact, her shoulder when the nightmares wouldn't end. She'd raised her like her own, given her her father's old desk, paid for braces, stayed up nights helping her memorize vocabulary flashcards. Lindsay had lived with Edith until she was 25. Then almost overnight she'd moved to Florida chasing some tech startup dream and a boyfriend named Tyler. The calls had grown shorter, the visits non-existent. Edith had told herself that's what happens. Young people grow, they change, they drift. But now, $1 million apartment, forged deeds, rental income, fake ID. Was that even possible? Edith stood up too fast and had to steady herself against the edge of the table. She shuffled to the hallway closet and pulled down a worn green folder. Inside were all her documents, birth certificate, social security card, her marriage license to Richard. Nothing was missing. No, that wasn't quite true. One item was gone, her state ID. The spare one she'd kept when the DMV gave her 2 by mistake during her last renewal. She remembered Lindsay teasing her about the bad photo. "You look like you're about to scold someone," she'd said. Edith had laughed and told her, "Maybe I am." The laughter felt years away now. She sank into her armchair by the window and stared down at the street. Below, taxis threaded through the chaos like schools of fish. People walked briskly, earbuds in collars turned up against the cold. No one looked up. No one looked in. $1 million apartment. In her name, rented out for years. Lindsay. What had she done? The air in the apartment suddenly felt heavier, as though someone had exhaled sorrow into every corner. She reached for the phone again, but didn't dial. Instead, she closed her eyes and listened to the radiator humming to the traffic below, to the faint echo of a child's voice calling her Aunt Edie. She had questions. She had fear. But more than anything, she had resolve. She would find out exactly what was going on, even if it meant digging into the one place she'd never thought she'd need to look into the heart of the girl she once called family. Under the yellow lamplight of her cluttered kitchen, Edith held her breath and slid the green folder back onto the table. The phone sat beside it, quiet now, its screen dark. The name Carl Hendricks still lingered in her mind like smoke. Her hands, though wrinkled and fragile-looking, shook with the steadiness of someone holding something ancient and wounded. Her breath made a soft rasp, shallow from the weight settling across her chest. She hadn't heard the name Lindsay in over 2 years. Not spoken aloud, not whispered even to herself. That wasn't because she'd forgotten. You didn't forget the person who called you Mama E from the age of 8 to 25. You just learned how to speak around the silence they left behind. She stared at the cupboard above her sink, but her mind was already somewhere else back in the old duplex in Harlem, in the early winter of 1996, the day Lindsay first walked into her life. Lindsay Davidson had been 8 years old when the accident took her mother. Her father hadn't been in the picture, some musician who'd vanished during a West Coast tour when Lindsay was a toddler. The crash had been brutal. A 4-car pileup on the FDR frozen tires black ice. Her mother's body had been crushed in the driver's seat. The state called Edith less than 24 hours later. Edith remembered sitting by the phone listening to the caseworker's voice. "You're listed as the emergency guardian." She had only met Lindsay's mother through church events and PTA meetings years back. Friendly, polite, the kind of woman who remembered birthdays. But they'd kept in touch just enough. And apparently just enough was everything when a child was left behind. Edith was 60 then, still sharp, still fast, still teaching English Lit part-time at a charter school. She'd been widowed 4 years at that point, had already sold the family home and moved into her modest 1-bedroom in Lower Manhattan. She'd been lonely, yes, but not broken. Not yet. And then came Lindsay, a fragile girl with stringy blonde hair and huge green eyes that looked like they'd seen war. She carried nothing but a garbage bag filled with a few clothes, 2 books, and a plush rabbit missing one ear. Edith had made her scrambled eggs that first night. Lindsay hadn't spoken much. She just stared at her plate until Edith said gently, "You don't have to finish it, honey, but you do have to taste it." That was the first time Lindsay smiled. Just the corners of her mouth, just a flicker. But it was the beginning. Over the next 17 years, they built a life. Edith gave her everything: stability, patience, Saturday morning pancakes, discipline when needed, though it never took more than a look to steer Lindsay straight. She bought Lindsay's first backpack, held her hand through dental surgery, sat through every school concert, every scraped knee cry, every tear over lost friends and failed algebra quizzes. Edith saved every school photo, even the ones where Lindsay scowled or blinked. She framed them like medals. She remembered one particular day, Lindsay at 13, pacing their tiny kitchen after a fight with a classmate. "Why did Mom have to die?" she cried. "Why didn't she leave me to someone rich?" Edith had just kept peeling potatoes, "because she knew I'd never leave you behind." And Lindsay had gone quiet. She was a smart girl, headstrong, obsessed with computers, online games, science fiction. But something in her had always been hungry, restless in a way Edith couldn't quite tame. By 19, Lindsay had built her own online business, designing websites for local stores. At 23, she met Tyler at a tech convention. At 25, she packed a single suitcase, kissed Edith's cheek, and whispered, "Don't worry, Mama E. I'll never leave you for good." It was the last time she stepped inside Edith's apartment. 4 years had passed since that day. The postcards stopped after the first year, then the occasional birthday text, then silence. Now that silence had been broken by $1 million condo, Edith stood body stiff from the memories and opened the hall closet again. She pulled down the old floral box labeled Lindsay. Inside were photos, letters, a dried corsage from her high school prom, and tucked at the bottom a sealed envelope with Lindsay's handwriting. "For when you miss me." Edith had never opened it. She set it aside and pulled out a second folder, the one with her original Social Security card, insurance records, her late husband's pension documents, and all the identification she had stored safely over the years. Her fingers moved methodically. First the ID, yes, still there. Then her tax returns, her Medicare paperwork, all present. But when she reached for the bank records, a cold shiver passed through her ribs. One file was missing, the document confirming her account at Edison Federal, an account she opened back in 1984 and had never closed. It had been used for everything: her pension, direct deposit, rent payments, prescriptions. She always kept a photocopy of her routing and account numbers inside the folder. Gone. She rummaged deeper. The small green card with her Social Security number gone too. She felt the air leave her lungs in a slow sinking tide. Was it possible? Had Lindsay taken them back when she still lived here? Back when she'd said she was helping Edith reorganize those dusty old files. Edith remembered trusting her. Why wouldn't she? Lindsay had sat at this very table trimming her grandmother's fingernails. She had helped Edith change her shower curtain, driven her to the podiatrist, brought home chicken noodle soup when she had the flu. Could someone like that steal? The woman who called her Mama. She thought again of Carl's voice on the phone, calm and professional. Bank documentation confirming regular rental income transfers to an account registered under your name. But Edith only had one account. Always had. And it barely held enough to cover next month's heating bill. She stood knees stiff and walked to the sink. She washed her hands slowly, deliberately, the way she had when Lindsay was a toddler, and they'd play in the dirt outside the park. As the water ran, a memory floated back to her. Lindsay, maybe 15, saying, "I wish I could make things better for you one day, Mama E. I want you to live in one of those buildings with doormen and elevators that don't break." Edith had laughed. "I don't need that, sweetheart. I just need you." It had been a nice thought. Now it tasted like irony. She turned off the tap, dried her hands, and without another pause, she picked up the phone and redialed the number that had called her earlier that day. It rang once before Carl Hendricks answered. "Mr. Hendricks." Edith said, her voice firmer than she expected. "I'd like to come in. I want to see those documents with my own eyes." Carl sounded surprised. "Absolutely, Mrs. Wells. We'll prepare everything for you." "When would be convenient?" "As soon as possible, tomorrow morning." She hung up and stared at the envelope Lindsay had once left her, the one marked, "For when you miss me." She didn't open it. Instead, she lit the kettle and sat by the window. Outside, the city flickered, unaware of her shifting world. The skyline hadn't changed, but something inside her had. Something ancient and quiet was now standing up, stretching, putting on shoes. She didn't know what she'd find in that law office. But she knew one thing. If someone had stolen her name, her identity, her dignity, then she was going to take it back, piece by piece, no matter what it cost. The elevator in the Midtown office building creaked as it descended. Edith gripped the steel rail as it hummed upward past glossy floors of glass and chrome. The world inside Brightwell and Goldstein was a different Manhattan than the one she knew, sleek, curated, marble-tiled, not a scuff mark in sight. She hadn't stepped into an office building like this since Richard passed. The receptionist offered a tight, professional smile and guided her to a glass-walled conference room with a view of the East River. Edith didn't look out. She was too busy counting the thud of her pulse in her neck. Carl Hendricks entered a few minutes later, young, impeccably groomed, not a single wrinkle on his suit or his forehead. He greeted her with a warm handshake and placed a thick manila folder in front of her. "I appreciate you coming in, Mrs. Wells," he said, sliding into the chair across from her. "I understand this is unusual." Edith said nothing. Carl opened the folder. The first document he removed was the deed transfer. "This," he began, "is the title to apartment 9F at Parkview Heights. Transferred from the developer to you on March 14th, 3 years ago." He slid the document across the table. It was clean, precise digital print over creamy official stock. Near the bottom was a signature in blue ink, Edith Marie Wells. She stared at it. It looked like her signature. The slanted E, the looping M, even the tiny break in the L of Wells that she'd always had since arthritis started bothering her wrist. It wasn't a copy. It was uncanny. Carl continued. "This page here, your ID was provided during closing, a requirement under state law." He turned the next page. It was a scanned image of a New York State ID. Her name, her birth date, her address, the old one where she still lived, and her face. The photo was well lit, cropped close, but Edith knew with total certainty she had never taken that picture. She leaned back, eyes narrowing. "That's not mine." Carl looked at her. "That's my face," she said. "But I've never posed for that photo. I've only ever used the ID they gave me 6 years ago, and that one doesn't look like this." "May I see it?" She reached into her coat and pulled it from her wallet. Carl compared them side by side. His eyebrows pinched together ever so slightly. "It's not identical," he said diplomatically, "but it's extremely close." Edith pressed her lips into a thin line. "That signature. That's not mine either. I don't care how close it looks. I didn't sign that." Carl nodded and slowly closed the folder. He was quiet a moment before he asked, "Would you be comfortable if I contacted the bank that's been transferring rent payments to your account? Perhaps we can trace the transactions together." "I don't have any rent payments," she snapped. "I've never seen a cent of this in my life." "I understand." He stood. "Let's make a few calls." An hour later, Edith left the building through a revolving door that felt like it might spin her into another life entirely. She stepped into the cold wind of Park Avenue with a body that suddenly felt 74 years old all over again. She didn't remember crossing the street, didn't remember walking 2 blocks south, but she did remember digging through her coat pocket for her phone and finding a number she hadn't dialed in a decade. Jack Meyer, retired NYPD detective, old school, widowed like her. They'd met in a grief support group back in 2010. He'd helped her once before when her landlord tried to evict her illegally in 12. After that, they talked occasionally. Coffee once a year, a holiday card. That was it. But Jack knew how to see through what people were trying to hide. He answered on the 3rd ring. "Edie," he said, surprised. "You okay?" She didn't say yes. Instead, her voice came out low and even. "I need your help. Someone's pretending to be me." They met that evening at a diner on East 53rd. Jack was heavier than she remembered, grayer too, but still had the same sharp eyes. He ordered coffee black. Edith didn't touch her tea. She told him everything about the call from the law office, the condo, the ID, the fake signature, the photo she never took, and Lindsay. When she said the name, Jack leaned back and crossed his arms. That the girl you raised like your own, Edith nodded. You think it was her? I don't want to think that, she said. But who else would know everything about me? Jack rubbed his chin. Let's start simple. That apartment's being rented out. Somebody's been collecting that income. Let's trace where it's going. They spent the next hour poring through the photocopies Carl had printed out. There were bank names, transaction IDs, masked account numbers. Carl had redacted certain details for privacy reasons, but Jack didn't need much. The rent, he muttered, tapping a sheet. $5,000 a month. Paid automatically by the management company to a checking account in your name. But I only have one account, Edith said, with Edison Federal. This one's with Horizon Trust, out of Miami. She looked up, heart-jumping. Lindsay moved to Miami. Jack raised an eyebrow. That's more than coincidence. He flipped to the second page. And get this, he said. The account was opened 3 years ago. Same month that deed transfer went through. Whoever did this, they planned it. Edith gripped the edge of the table. Can we prove it's not me? Jack scoffed gently. Edie, I've known you long enough to say this. If you'd pulled off an identity scheme that smooth, you wouldn't be eating canned soup and clipping coupons. That almost made her smile. Jack continued. Here's what I'm going to do. I've got a buddy who used to work at Horizon Trust. He owes me one. I'll see what I can get on this account. Transfers, registration, name, all of it. And the ID, she asked. I'll get a digital forensics guy to look at the file. These fake IDs. They're getting better, but they're still beatable. Edith sat in silence for a long beat. The hum of the diner's neon lights filled the space between their words. Then she said, if it is Lindsay, if she did this. Jack's face softened. You're not the first one to get burned by family, Edie. You won't be the last. She nodded, but it wasn't just that. It wasn't just betrayal. It was the theft of her name, her life, her independence. It was Lindsay looking her in the eye all those years ago and saying, I'll never leave you, while planting the seeds to vanish with everything she had. Jack reached across the table, hand gentle on hers. We'll figure it out. She nodded again. But the truth was already calcifying inside her bones. She hadn't lost her name. Someone had stolen it and made a fortune in her shadow, and she wasn't going to let them get away with it. The plane began its descent over Miami as the sun melted into the Atlantic like an ember dropped in water. Through the oval window, palm trees lined up like soldiers under the sky's final blush. But the warmth that blanketed the city didn't touch Edith. Not in her bones, not in her thoughts. She sat stiffly beside Jack, her hands folded over the strap of her purse. The airline coffee had soured in her mouth an hour ago. Her knees ached from the flight. Her heart ached from something else entirely. When they landed, Jack rented a car, an anonymous black sedan that smelled faintly of coconut air freshener. Edith sat silent beside him as he navigated the unfamiliar streets, GPS muttering in the background. Every street sign felt surreal. It wasn't the Miami she remembered from the postcards Lindsay once sent. Back then, Lindsay had written about sunsets and beaches, about opportunity and warmth, and finally having her own space. But none of those cards had mentioned the money, the account, the theft. Now Jack guided the car past rows of pastel condos and gated drives, muttering as he scanned numbers. They pulled up outside a high-rise tower with tinted glass and white balconies that shimmered in the afternoon light. Park Grove Tower. A valet approached, eyeing the car. Jack waved him off and pulled into a guest spot by the curb. Stay sharp, he said. Edith took a breath. I may look old, but I've got more sharp left than you think. Jack smiled. They exited the car. The lobby was all chrome and air conditioning perfumed with something citrusy and expensive. Behind the front desk stood a concierge in a slim black suit who barely glanced up as they passed. Jack, dressed in khakis and a polo, looked like someone's retired uncle. Edith, in her charcoal wool coat and silk scarf, looked like someone who had just buried the last of her dignity and was ready to dig it back up. They rode the elevator to the 12th floor, Unit 12C. Tyler's name was still on the directory, just like the records had said. Jack stepped back as Edith raised her hand and knocked. The door opened a moment later. Tyler Wallace stood barefoot in designer joggers, a white V-neck clinging to his toned chest. His hair was perfectly tousled. He blinked at Edith, surprised, polite, but without recognition. "Yes," Edith smiled faintly, adjusting her scarf. "Mr. Wallace." "Yes, my name's Mary Green. I was given your name by a friend in New York. She said you were the person to speak to about opening a private account here." Discreetly, Tyler blinked, then smiled tight and professional. "Of course. I'm no longer with the bank full-time, but I do consult. You're from New York." "Born and raised," she said. "But I'm thinking of relocating some of my assets." He gestured for her to step inside. "Please come in." She looked at Jack. "My associate prefers to wait outside." Jack nodded. "I'm the ride." Tyler didn't protest. The condo was sleek minimalist, with floor-to-ceiling glass that overlooked Biscayne Bay, furniture in soft grays, a kitchen island that gleamed like a showroom. On the wall hung a large abstract painting, probably overpriced. The place screamed money, fast money. He motioned toward the living room. "Have a seat. Can I offer you something?" "Water sparkling." "I'm fine." She eased into the leather couch, careful to hide the tremor in her fingers. So he said, sitting across from her, "What sort of assets are we talking about?" She pulled a notebook from her purse. Inside was nothing but blank pages. "Let's just say I've come into something recently. Through family. Property mostly. I'm not sure who I can trust to move things around." Tyler leaned forward, elbows on knees. "We specialize in discreet transfers, especially if your name needs to remain off the grid for a bit." His words oozed charm, but it was practiced, coded. She could see it now, the same slickness that had probably drawn Lindsay in. She smiled. "It's funny. I wasn't even going to come down here. But then I remembered your name. You used to date a girl I knew. Lindsay Davidson." It was subtle, a flicker, the shift in his shoulders, the faint tension in his jaw. But Edith saw it. "I don't know who that is," he said quickly. Too quickly. She tilted her head. "Are you sure she said you were the best? Called you her miracle man? Said you helped her mother's estate get creatively reorganized?" He stood up suddenly. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," he said. "I don't think I can help you after all." "Oh, that's too bad," Edith replied. "I was really hoping you could tell me more about this building. It's beautiful. Reminds me of Parkview Heights in Manhattan. Apartment 9F, actually." His face changed, just for a second. He looked at her now not as a potential client, but as a threat. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Behind her back, Edith pressed the button on the voice recorder Jack had slipped into her coat pocket. It had been rolling since she walked through the door. She stood slowly. Her legs felt like sticks, fragile and thin, but her spine was straight. As she reached the door, she turned to him one last time. "You know," she said, "for someone who doesn't know Lindsay, you sure reacted fast." He didn't respond. She stepped out into the hallway, found Jack standing by the elevator, arms crossed. "How'd it go?" Edith handed him the recorder. "He knows." They rode down in silence. Outside, the city buzzed around them, cars honking, seagulls crying overhead, the heat of the pavement rising like breath from the earth. But for Edith, it was all muted. She had the confirmation now. Tyler Wallace knew Lindsay, knew her well enough to panic when her name was mentioned. "Well," Jack said, sliding the recorder into his jacket pocket, "that's one domino." Edith stared down the street where the palm trees danced in the breeze. "No," she said quietly, "that's the first nail." Jack drove them away from the tower, away from the waterfront, away from the slick life Lindsay and Tyler had built with a stolen name. Edith leaned her head against the window, the glass cool against her temple. "You okay?" Jack asked. She didn't answer for a long moment. "Then finally, I want to know where every dollar went. Every signature, every lie." Jack nodded. "We'll get it," he said. And for the first time since Manhattan, Edith believed him. Jack parked the sedan 2 blocks from the FBI field office in Miami. The morning heat had already begun pressing against the city like a heavy hand. But inside the car, a different kind of pressure simmered. In Edith's lap sat a flash drive. On it, the full 34-minute recording of Tyler Wallace's increasingly panicked conversation, stitched with names, account implications, and most importantly, lies. It wasn't a confession, but to a trained ear, it was enough to raise questions that no bank executive could explain away. "You ready?" Jack asked, glancing over. Edith didn't answer right away. She'd barely spoken all morning, not after listening to the recording herself the night before. Not after replaying the moment Tyler flinched when she mentioned Parkview Heights. It wasn't just guilt. It was fear, raw and instinctive. "I want this done right," she finally said. Jack nodded. "Then let's hand it to people who can bring it home." Inside the FBI building, they were ushered into a plain interview room. No windows, fluorescent lighting that hummed faintly above. 2 agents arrived 15 minutes later. One was Agent Cruz, mid-40s, composed, clipped speech. The other, Agent Franklin, younger, took notes silently on a tablet. Jack slid the flash drive across the table. "What exactly are we listening for?" Cruz asked. Jack leaned back. "Impersonation, fraud, maybe even interstate identity theft." Cruz raised an eyebrow. "Go on." Jack laid it out. The forged deed. The ID photo Edith never posed for. The rental income routed into an account opened in her name at a bank Tyler Wallace used to work for. And now a conversation in which Tyler denied knowing Lindsay Davidson, until her name turned his face to granite. Agent Cruz connected the flash drive to her laptop. Within minutes, she'd skipped to the crucial section. As Tyler's voice played initially smooth, then fraying at the edges, her expression changed. At the point where he stood abruptly rejecting the meeting, Cruz pressed pause. "Can we get access to that rental history?" she asked. "I already have," Jack said, reaching into his folder. "Property Management Company's report. They've been wiring rent $5,200 monthly to an account opened 3 years ago at Horizon Trust. Registered under the name Edith Marie Wells." Franklin frowned. "That matches the date of the condo deed transfer." Cruz nodded. "That's not coincidence." Edith finally spoke. "They used me." Cruz looked at her gently. "Ma'am, we'll need a formal affidavit from you. A sworn statement that you never signed these documents, never authorized these accounts." "You'll have it. And we'll need permission to run your SSN through our financial database." "Take whatever you need," Edith said. "Just take it back from them." 2 days later, Jack and Edith returned to the office. This time the mood was different. The FBI had pulled the string and the web unraveled fast. Lindsay and Tyler hadn't stopped at one forged account. They'd opened 4 each in Edith's name spread across multiple banks all in Florida, all traced to Horizon Trust Bay Central Credit Union and one offshore account that was masked under a numbered shell company. The paper trail was murky but clear enough. Lindsay had used a fake Florida driver's license, listing herself as Edith M. Wells, and had opened a line of credit under that name, then used it to purchase a partial stake, 22%, in a tech startup based in Coral Gables. The investment had been made 2 years ago. The company had since doubled its valuation, but the ownership record still listed Edith M. Wells as the silent partner. "She essentially created a shadow version of you," Agent Cruz said, sliding a copy of the report across the table. Jack whistled. "Damn." Edith stared at the number at the bottom of the report. 123,8461. That was the total estimated damage. Cash transactions diverted rent interest dividends from the startup investment. "She lived my life," Edith whispered. "But better, and not a word to me." Cruz nodded. "We're filing formal charges. Identity theft, wire fraud, forgery, conspiracy. Because of the multi-state nature, this qualifies as a federal investigation." Jack leaned forward, and Tyler. "He's on administrative leave from his financial advisory firm. We've subpoenaed his phone records and seized his laptop. What we found on it connects directly to Lindsay's shared documents, images of fake IDs, even template software used for altering licenses. He's not clean. But she was the architect." "And where is she?" Jack asked. Franklin pulled up a digital map. "Here, Coral Way, Miami. Rented condo under the name Laura Wells. Matching photo to the forged ID." They slid the screen toward Edith. It was a surveillance still, Lindsay, now brunette sunglasses in her hair, carrying a shopping bag. She looked different, older, sharper around the eyes, but it was her. Edith didn't blink. "What happens next?" she asked. "We're building the arrest warrant," Cruz said. "You'll be contacted when charges are filed." Edith stood. Her back was straight, but her hands trembled. "Make sure she knows," she said, voice low, "that I saw her face when she lied to mine. That night in the hotel room overlooking the marina, Jack poured them both a drink, one finger of scotch for him, ginger ale for her. The TV played softly in the background, ignored. Edith sat by the window watching the boat sway beneath the Florida moonlight. "You don't have to go to the trial," Jack said, breaking the silence. "I will. You don't have to talk to her. I want to." He watched her for a moment. "You think she'll say she's sorry?" Edith laughed, short and bitter. "She said that once already, the night she left. Said she'd never leave me, that I'd always have her." Jack took a sip of his drink. "Some people mean it, and some people mean to mean it." Edith nodded. "But I'm done waiting for words. I want the truth. In front of a judge, in front of her. I want to look her in the eyes and ask one question. What's that?" She turned to him. Was it ever real? Jack didn't have an answer. The silence was thick between them. But outside, past the salt air and traffic hum, Edith felt something begin to shift. Not quite justice. Not yet peace. But the first tremor of something beginning to return. Her name. Her story. And no one else was going to own it again. The fluorescent lights in the federal holding facility buzzed softly overhead, casting a sterile glow over the white linoleum floors. Edith sat alone in a visiting booth metal stool, plastic partition-thick pane of reinforced glass between her and the steel door ahead. Her hands resting on the cold aluminum table were still. Her breath was slow, no trembling, no fear. Only the quiet certainty of someone who had come for an answer. The door opened. Lindsay was led in by a guard, wrists in cuffs, hair tied back hastily, orange jumpsuit stiff around her shoulders. She didn't look like herself. Her cheekbones seemed sharper, her skin dull. But it was her. The girl Edith had once fed with a teaspoon and tucked in after nightmares. She sat across from Edith. Neither of them spoke for several seconds. Then Lindsay picked up the receiver. Edith did the same. "I didn't think you'd come," Lindsay said, her voice scratchy but steady. "I didn't come to see you," Edith replied. "I came to see the person who used my name like it was spare change." Lindsay looked down. Her fingers twitched around the cord of the receiver. "I didn't mean..." "Don't," Edith cut in. "Don't lie in here. There are cameras, recordings, and whatever you say will be used." Lindsay blinked, eyes wide. "I'm not lying. We had an understanding. Years ago, remember? You told me that if I ever needed help, I could use your name to apply for credit." Edith stared. "I said you could put me down as a reference on a student loan. That's not the same thing." Edith's eyes narrowed. "You stole from me, Lindsay. You stole my pension, my name, my signature. You forged ID. You created bank accounts. You bought stock in a company. You lived a life built out of everything I spent 70 years protecting. I was going to pay it back," Lindsay whispered. "I swear, I just needed a head start," Tyler said. Edith leaned in, voice low and calm. "You had a head start. I gave you 17 years of one." Lindsay said nothing. Her throat moved like she was swallowing something too big. "You told the FBI we had a verbal agreement," Edith said. "Do you believe that's true?" Lindsay didn't answer. "Say it if you do." Silence. "Then no," Lindsay said so faintly Edith almost didn't hear it. "You forged my photo," Edith said. "Where did you take that picture?" Lindsay looked up, blinking fast. Tyler knew someone who could fake credentials. He used a green screen and... "I don't want logistics," Edith snapped. "I want motive. I want to know how a girl I held through fevers, who I raised after her mother died, who called me Mama E, decided I was worth less than a condo in Manhattan." Lindsay's eyes welled. "I didn't know it'd go this far." "You knew exactly how far," Edith replied. "That's why you never called. Not one birthday, not one postcard." Tears slipped down Lindsay's cheeks now. "I didn't know how to come back," she said. "Tyler was in trouble. His parents lost everything in the 2008 crash. He said if we had the apartment, we could rent it for a year, flip the investment, and return it before anyone noticed. And then we moved into the circle, friends with money. No one questioned it, and the money just came, month after month. You thought I wouldn't notice. I thought you were already gone," Lindsay admitted. "I imagined you sitting in that old apartment, not even opening your mail. I told myself you wouldn't care." Edith didn't speak. Her face remained still, unreadable. "Did you," Lindsay asked softly, "care?" Edith inhaled slowly. I cared that I gave you everything I had, and it still wasn't enough to stop you from becoming someone I don't recognize. Lindsay's lip quivered. I'm sorry. You're sorry now. I didn't come here thinking I'd cry. Lindsay said, tears streaking down. I thought I could explain, but I can't. I was wrong. All of it. Edith looked at her for a long moment, then asked quietly, Did you love me? Lindsay's eyes widened. Or was I just a step on your way to something better? Lindsay shook her head, desperate. I loved you, I still do. I didn't know how to fix it. You didn't try. The room went silent. Behind the glass, Edith's voice dropped to a whisper. Do you know what it feels like to realize someone took your identity and made it more useful than you ever did yourself? Lindsay opened her mouth, but Edith held up a hand. I'm not here for apologies, she said. Or tears. I'm here because the person you stole from deserves a face-to-face with her thief. Please, Lindsay said, don't press charges. Edith almost smiled, bitter and small. They're not my charges anymore. It's federal now. The weight of those words dropped into the room like stone. Edith stood slowly, replacing the receiver on its hook. Lindsay did the same, eyes wide, lips trembling. A guard opened the door behind her. Edith stepped toward it, but paused. She didn't turn around. I don't need revenge, Lindsay, she said. Lindsay swallowed. I need justice, and I need it to have my name on it this time, not yours. And with that, she walked out. Outside, Jack leaned against the wall near the exit, flipping through a newspaper he didn't really read. He looked up as Edith stepped into the daylight. How'd it go? She cried. Guilty tears. Unclear. They walked toward the parking lot. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows beneath their feet. She say why she did it? Jack asked. She said it was to help her in-laws get out of debt. Said she thought she'd return it all. Jack scoffed. That's like saying you'll give the knife back after the bleeding stops. Edith didn't laugh. She just kept walking. At the car, Jack opened the passenger door. You want a drink? Food. Edith shook her head. She looked out across the lot to the perimeter fences and motion-activated cameras. Beyond those, the city shimmered as if untouched by betrayal. Then she said, barely above a whisper, I don't want punishment. I want acknowledgement. I want the court to say aloud what was taken from me, not money, not apartments, my name. Jack nodded. Then you'll have it. She climbed into the car. Behind her, the prison loomed full of echoes, excuses, and empty promises. But ahead, for the first time in years, the road opened, and Edith was behind the wheel of her own story again. The email from the U.S. Attorney's Office came early on a Wednesday, a sterile PDF attachment titled People vs. Lindsay Davidson, Federal Recommendation Memo. Jack had printed it for Edith, laid it flat on her kitchen table in Manhattan, right next to the same chipped teacup she always used. He said nothing as she read. The first few paragraphs were legal formality, charges, statutes, sentencing guidelines. Then came the line that made her breath pause. The FBI recommends formal prosecution under federal identity theft and financial fraud statutes unless the victim seeks an alternative resolution. Edith lowered the page slowly. Jack cleared his throat. They want you to decide. She said nothing. They've got her. Full evidence chain. Witnesses, bank records, signed statements from Tyler Wallace. Lindsay's lawyer's already talking about plea deals. Still nothing. They're asking if you want to press full charges or seek civil remedy only. Jack studied her. Edie, this is your call. Edith sat back in the creaking wooden chair. Sunlight spilled in through the window, catching the dust in the air like snow in suspension. I don't want her in prison, she said finally. Jack blinked. You sure? She nodded. I don't want her behind bars. I want her to carry it. Jack leaned forward. She stole over $100,000. And she'll feel it more, Edith said, if she has to live with what she did. Jack raised an eyebrow. You want probation? I want restriction, she replied. She doesn't get to touch money again without remembering my name. And the cash, she exhaled. Looked past the window at the rooftops of buildings stacked like bricks on bricks. Old Manhattan. The one that raised her. The one she would soon leave behind. I want it donated, she said. Jack frowned. Donate it. To the Elder Justice Foundation, she said. They fight for people like me. People without voices, without proof. I had Jack Meyer. Most don't. Jack stared. You're serious. I don't need the money, she said. I need the story to matter. At the next meeting with the assistant U.S. attorney, Edith sat poised in her charcoal coat scarf tight at the neck, voice calm. "I'm not pressing for incarceration," she said. "My condition is restitution full. The condo title, the investment shares, the rental profits, all of it returned or redirected to a verified 501c3 that combats elder fraud." The prosecutor leaned back, clearly surprised. "You understand she could serve time?" "I do," Edith replied, "but that wouldn't serve me. She violated multiple federal statutes, and she'll live with that for the rest of her life." The prosecutor glanced at Jack, who gave a single nod. "Then we'll pursue a plea agreement with probation restitution and financial prohibition clauses," he said. "We'll issue a financial guardianship restriction, 5 years, no personal financial control, all accounts monitored." Edith nodded. "I want the press to hear it," she said, "not to shame her, but so others know it's not just about prison, it's about truth." The press conference happened 2 weeks later, a quiet affair at the federal courthouse. No cameras allowed inside the courtroom, but outside the steps were crowded with journalists clutching voice recorders and notepads. They weren't here for Lindsay Davidson. They were here for the woman she stole. When Edith emerged, flanked by Jack and 2 officials, she didn't flinch under the cameras. She didn't cry. She didn't speak long. Just enough. "My name is Edith Wells," she said, voice carrying like silk through concrete. "And for 3 years I didn't own it. Someone else used it, spent it, signed it on things I never touched. But today I take it back, and I give it forward." She raised a folded sheet of paper. "This check worth over $120,000 is going to the Elder Justice Foundation, so that others like me, mothers, fathers, widows, won't suffer in silence." Flashes burst around her. Edith's gaze didn't waver. "She took my name," she said, "so I made sure the world remembered it." And then she stepped away from the mic. No further comment, no courtroom drama, just the kind of exit that belongs to someone who has finally closed the door behind her. Lindsay was sentenced that same week. 5 years probation, mandatory psychological evaluation, ban from holding any personal or commercial financial account without court supervision. She was barred from working in any financial institution, real estate, or investment group. She was ordered to complete 600 hours of community service, preferably with an elder assistance organization, the judge had said. Her lawyer had tried to bargain for less. But Edith's words, spoken firmly in the impact statement, carried more weight than any prosecutor. "I won't fight you in court, but the world now knows what you did, and that will follow you further than any guard ever could." The courtroom had been silent after that. Even Lindsay's tears hadn't moved it. That night, Edith stood in the apartment at Lower Manhattan for the last time. She didn't pack much, just a single suitcase, a box of photographs, and the antique clock that had belonged to her mother. Jack arrived just before dawn to drive her to the train. "You sure you don't want to fly?" he asked. "I've seen enough clouds from the wrong angle," she said. They rode to the station in silence. "I heard from Channel 7, Jack said finally. "They're running a piece on you, calling you the voice of elder identity fraud." Edith chuckled. "Imagine that. A voice. You earned it." She turned to look out the window. "No," she said, "I reclaimed it." When they reached the station, she didn't linger. She stepped into the train car, nodded to the conductor, and took a seat by the window. Jack tapped the glass before she left. She rolled it down. "Where to now?" he asked. Edith smiled. "Somewhere with birds," she said, "and no mailboxes." He laughed. "Vermont," she added, "a cabin, small, lakeside." He nodded. "You'll be all right." She looked at him. For the first time in years, the weight was off her shoulders. "I was never not all right," she said. "I was just misplaced." And then the train pulled away. In the months that followed, news outlets ran features about the Edith Wells case. Journalists cited her restraint as rare noble. Her name was attached to new legislation in New York City. The Wells reform aimed at increasing penalties for elder financial fraud and expanding access to pro bono legal aid. But Edith didn't follow the news. She spent her mornings feeding ducks by a foggy lake. She wrote letters by hand and never mailed them. She drank tea with maple syrup and sat barefoot on a porch that creaked with memory. No one in town knew her story. No one called her by anything but Miss Edie. And that was enough, because sometimes justice doesn't need prison bars. Sometimes it just needs to be written in headlines and bank records and law books, and most of all, in the silence of a woman who now sleeps without double-locking her door. Her name was Edith Wells, and she belonged to no one but herself. The cabin sat on the edge of the lake, like it had grown there, just another root in the Vermont forest. Pine trees huddled like guardians around the clearing, their branches dusted in early winter snow. Smoke spiraled gently from the chimney, carrying the scent of cedar and quiet. Inside, the only sound was the soft cluck and flap of wings from the pen near the rear porch. Edith rose just after 6 each morning. She didn't use an alarm, her body honed by decades of caregiving, and early subway trains knew how to rise before the sun finished its stretch across the hills. She'd tug on thick socks and boots lined with fur, wrap her shawl around her shoulders, and step out into the crispness. The ducks, 8 of them, now gathered near the trough as she approached. She greeted them by name: Maisie Pearl, Indigo, Gordon, Two Toes, Clementine, Jude, and Little Frank. "Breakfast is coming," she'd say, her voice light as frost. "Just don't fight over the barley today, Frank. Be civilized." She scattered grain with practiced ease. They pecked and waddled, flapping briefly when the cold tickled their feathers. The mornings were always the same. Feed the ducks. Gather a few eggs. Check the greenhouse tarp for tears. Boil water from the well. Steep her tea leaves from the mason jar she'd packed back in Manhattan. She didn't bring internet with her. Didn't even plug in the old rotary phone Jack insisted she keep for emergencies. Her cabin had no signal, no satellite. Only silence, and the occasional caw of a raven passing overhead like an old secret. She had her journals, and a fountain pen. Each afternoon, after soup or leftover biscuits, she would sit at the old writing desk by the window, where the light hit just right around 2:30, and she would write letters. To no one. To herself. To people who had long since stopped answering. She'd start: "Dear Edith, today the lake was gray and silver at once, like a mirror that couldn't decide which memory to reflect." And she'd go on for pages, writing about the silence, the ducks, the cold that kissed the porch steps before noon, the sudden joy she'd felt when she learned that rosemary could grow even in frost if you whispered to it while watering. She didn't write about Manhattan, not often. She didn't write about Lindsay, though once in the middle of a sleepless night, she wrote a single sentence on the back of a grocery list. Forgiveness isn't about setting them free. It's about unlocking the door and walking out yourself. She burned that one in the fireplace after reading it aloud. It felt lighter that way. Weeks passed, then months. She saw no one except for the delivery boy who left supplies once a month at the base of the trail. Jack had written once, said the news had moved on, that Lindsay had finished her first 100 hours of community service, that the Guardian Elder Defense Organization had seen an uptick in calls since Edith's story aired. Edith folded the letter neatly and placed it in the drawer beside the old alarm clock she no longer wound. The air up here smelled like sap and smoke and something else, something slower. Time. It was just after the first snow that the package arrived. A cardboard box wrapped in simple brown paper tied with twine. No return address, just a sticker from a logistics company. Inside, among the packaging, was a white envelope and a heavy blue folder bearing the seal of the Guardian Elder Defense Foundation. She set them on the table, lit the oil lamp, sat down, opened the envelope first. The letter was short. "Dear Mrs. Edith Wells, you may not remember us, but we remember you. Because of your story, because of your decision not to seek vengeance but to create legacy, we were able to establish the Edith Wells Fellowship, a legal scholarship and training program for young attorneys specializing in elder protection. As of this writing, 5 lawyers have entered the program. 2 have taken on active elder exploitation cases in Illinois and California. One case was nearly identical to yours. But because the victim had trained someone who cared, they didn't lose everything. Thank you. You saved more than just yourself. You reminded us that justice isn't always loud, but it is always heard. Warmest regards. Dr. Carla Nunez, Director, Guardian Elder Defense Foundation." Edith sat still for a long time. Then she opened the blue folder. Inside were photos of the first 5 fellows' smiling young faces. Some barely out of law school, one gray-haired woman who looked more like a librarian than a prosecutor. Their bios were stapled beneath their photos. Edith read every word. One of them had grown up caring for her grandfather after a stroke. Another had lost an aunt to a scam in 2006. Each one had a reason, and now apparently they had a cause. Her name, the Edith Wells Fellowship, was printed in gold on the bottom corner of the cover. She laughed. Not loud, not bitter, not broken, but something whole, something round in the chest. She leaned back in the wooden chair, the fire popping softly behind her. Outside, the ducks settled for the evening, and the wind carried snowflakes like the wings of old ghosts fluttering down. She didn't cry. Not this time. She simply smiled and whispered to the room, "Well, I'll be damned." That night, Edith sat by the fire longer than usual. She boiled another pot of tea, brought out her best blanket, opened a fresh journal page. She began again. "Dear Edith, you mattered more than you thought, and someone heard you, and they made a promise in your name." She paused, then wrote one final line. Maybe that's what legacy is, not a monument, but a ripple that never stops reaching. She folded the page, slid it into the envelope, wrote no address. She'd burn it in the morning. Some messages don't need stamps. Just peace. The letter arrived on a Thursday. It was handwritten on thick ivory paper, the kind no one used anymore unless they meant something. Edith found it wedged between a feed delivery invoice and a catalog for seed potatoes. She almost missed it would have if not for the familiar looping scrawl across the front, Jack Meyer. Her fingers paused. She brought the letter inside, brushed off the snow, sat at the table, and opened it with the small ivory-handled knife she kept by the sugar jar. The first words stopped her breath. "It's done. They passed it. Unanimous vote. It's called the Edith Wells Act." She read it twice before continuing. "It'll change everything, Edie. Financial institutions are now required to report suspicious elder transactions within 48 hours. Law schools are funding new clinics for elder law. Your case is being taught in 2 universities already, NYU and Columbia. You said you didn't want legacy, but legacy has a funny way of showing up when you're not looking." She blinked slowly, folded the letter with trembling hands. She wasn't someone who chased legacy. She wasn't someone who needed recognition. But to know that the worst thing that ever happened to her had become a reason someone else might be protected, that was worth more than plaques or podiums. That was worth memory. That evening she lit the fireplace early and watched the snow drift sideways past the porch railing. She thought about how many people had stood silent when their names were used. How many had no jack, no microphone, no fellowship bearing their name, and how maybe now they wouldn't be alone anymore. Elsewhere, in a different kind of silence, Lindsay Davidson's name vanished from headlines. After completing her 5-year probation, she moved out of state. No interviews, no social media. Her last known residence was a rented studio near Albany under a different surname. The press tried to find her for a follow-up story, The Woman Who Stole a Life, but she refused all contact. She faded, as some people do, into the long gray shadow of public shame. Tyler Wallace didn't vanish. He couldn't. His disbarment from the financial sector became public record. Every time he applied for work, even at a call center, it came up. Permanent industry ban. Subject of federal financial misconduct. His LinkedIn page went dark. His condo was sold to cover legal fees. People asked what happened to Tyler Wallace. No one remembered his face, but everyone remembered hers. And then something strange began to happen. At first, it was a trickle, scattered reports, quiet complaints. A woman in Spokane filed a fraud case against her nephew for cashing her pension checks. A man in Pittsburgh brought suit against his own daughter for draining his retirement fund. A widow in Des Moines testified that she never would have spoken up if she hadn't seen that Channel 7 segment about the woman whose granddaughter stole her name. The media called it the Edith effect. Advocacy groups called it overdue. Lawyers called it a movement. Edith never called it anything. She just kept feeding the ducks. One morning in late January, after a heavy snow that blanketed the cabin in glistening white, she received a package, small padded, addressed in a young, neat hand. Inside was a flash drive and a note. "Dear Mrs. Wells, my name is Miriam Lee. I'm a 3rd-year law student at Columbia. I first heard your story in Professor Harlan's seminar on ethics in financial crimes. You changed how I see this field. I want to fight for people like you. Our class is hosting a conference on elder rights next month, and we'd be honored if you could speak. Even a few words, even a video. We're not asking for publicity, we just want your voice. With gratitude, Miriam." Edith sat back. She looked at the ducks waddling in the snow by the pond. She looked at the fireplace where her tea was still steaming. She didn't travel anymore. The thought of speaking in front of students made her stomach twist. But something in Miriam's letter stayed with her. "We just want your voice." That evening, she borrowed the tape recorder Jack had left her still packed in the same box buried under old mittens and canned tomatoes. She sat at the kitchen table, turned on the recorder, and spoke. Her voice was low, warm, steady, the kind of voice that people lean toward. And this is what she said: "You'll be told to protect your clients. But some won't ask for protection. They'll sit in silence because they don't want to believe it was their own family, their own children, their blood. You have to speak louder than their shame. I didn't speak up until it was almost too late, because I thought silence was loyalty. I thought forgiving meant forgetting. Don't let trust become the reason you look away. Don't let love become the excuse they hide behind. Don't let kindness cost you your name. If someone ever takes your story and tries to rewrite it, make sure the ending belongs to you." She clicked off the recorder. No applause, no spotlight, just wind outside and a fire that crackled like a heartbeat. She mailed the flash drive the next day with no return address. A week later, Miriam played the recording in front of 86 law students. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. Back in Vermont, winter passed like a long exhale. The lake thawed slowly. The ducks molted. Edith planted chard and rosemary again. She didn't read the articles anymore, but once in a while a letter would still find its way up the trail. A student, a widow, a volunteer from Elder Justice. They all ended the same way. "Thank you for telling the truth. It gave us permission to do the same." Edith would smile, fold the letter, and place it in the wooden box on her mantel. She didn't need a legacy. She just needed to know someone else finally believed her story was worth telling, and now they did. The back room of the cabin had once been a place for storage stacked crates of dried beans, dusty books she hadn't opened in years, a broken rocking chair no one had the heart to throw away. But slowly over the course of months, Edith transformed it into something else entirely. A library, not of published books or bound encyclopedias, but of letters. She used old cigar boxes to store them at first. Then a carpenter from the next town over, having heard her story from a cousin, built her 3 shelves out of pine, sturdy, simple, perfect for what she called the archive. Inside were letters from across the country, some typed on yellowing stationery, others scribbled in trembly script on the backs of grocery lists, prescription sheets, or church programs. She had them from Utah, Alabama, Maine, South Dakota. Letters postmarked with stamps from small towns no one had heard of, and big cities where people vanished into elevators and taxicabs. She read every one. She cataloged them by hand, date, location, age of the writer, the kind of betrayal they described. She didn't judge them. She didn't annotate or edit. She simply preserved, because these were stories no one else was keeping. A woman in Tulsa wrote about her grandson forging a second mortgage and losing her house. A man in Fresno detailed how his niece drained his retirement account for a pyramid scheme. A couple in Ohio, both in their 80s, explained how their son had them sign over power of attorney, then never visited again. But the letters weren't only about what was taken. They were about what remained. One wrote, "I still get up every morning and make coffee." He didn't take that. Another said, "I bought a new journal. I write in it with my left hand since arthritis stole my right, but not my stories." And this one from a retired postmaster in Kansas. "They stole my savings. But I remembered your story, Mrs. Wells, and I told mine to someone too. That was the day I became real again." Edith placed that one on the top shelf, front and center. She called that shelf the light. Eventually, the children in the village began to notice. They'd walk past the cabin on their way home from the one-room schoolhouse. Some days, Edith was out front feeding the ducks. Other times, she sat under the awning sorting envelopes like a quiet librarian of sorrow. One boy, Tommy, stopped one day and said, "Are you the lady who got her name stolen?" She looked up, squinted into the sun, and replied, "No, I'm the lady who took it back." He grinned. The next week, a few more children showed up. They stood awkwardly near the steps until she said, "Well, don't just hover. Sit down. What do you know about writing a proper letter?" They shrugged. So she started teaching. She called it the quiet class. Twice a week for an hour after school, they'd sit cross-legged on blankets in the back room and learn how to write letters, not emails, not texts, but letters, with stamps, with honesty. with their full names signed at the bottom like promises. She taught them how to fold paper into thirds, how to address an envelope, how to tell a story that was true and not just clever. Some of them didn't understand why it mattered, until she brought out a box of letters from the archive. This, she said, holding one up, was written by a woman in Georgia who hadn't spoken to her daughter in 15 years. She wrote this letter and sent it to me, and now someone remembers her name. That makes her real again. One of the kids raised a hand. Did your daughter do that to you? Edith paused. I never had a daughter, she said, but I had a girl who called me hers. Another hand, a small girl no older than 8. Did she love you? Edith looked down, then up. Yes, she said, but love doesn't always stop people from doing harm. The room went quiet. Then the little girl asked the question no one else dared. Did someone you love ever betray you? Edith didn't flinch. She nodded. Yes. A beat passed, and then softly she added, but what scared me more than betrayal was how long I stayed quiet about it. The children didn't move, they just listened, not with pity but with something more sacred. Attention. As the snow thawed into spring and green broke through the frost, the quiet class grew. Soon parents were asking if they could attend. A retired English teacher offered to help. A high schooler began volunteering on Saturdays to digitize some of the letters for those too fragile to read by hand. And still the letters kept coming, sometimes 10 a week, other times only 1, but it always felt like a revelation when it arrived. She began hanging quotes around the cabin snippets from letters framed in old wooden scraps. My son took my bank account, but not my soul. I cried in silence for 2 years. Now I scream with pen and ink. They forged my signature. I forged a new beginning. Visitors began coming, quiet ones, journalists, nurses, once even a federal judge on sabbatical. They didn't come for interviews. They came to sit in the silence, to read, to remember, to feel what Edith had built. A place where stories couldn't be stolen. A place where truth had a stamp and a shelf. A place where trust once broken could be rewritten, not erased. One morning she sat by the window sipping chamomile when a letter arrived from the Elder Justice Foundation. It was short. We're creating a national traveling exhibit. Your archive, your story, your students' letters, the ones no one else would tell. We're calling it The Things You Can't Fake. Edith stared out at the lake. The ducks waddled in a line. She smiled, because she knew they were right. You can fake a name, an ID, a bank account. You can forge a signature and rent out a life that doesn't belong to you. But you can't fake healing. You can't fake a girl's question asked with innocence. You can't fake a story told with a trembling hand. You can't fake redemption. You can only earn it 1 envelope at a time. The wind had begun to change. It wasn't the sharp, biting kind that came with December, nor the frantic gusts of March. It was late autumn in Vermont, a soft, knowing wind, the kind that rustled through the birch leaves like a hand turning pages in a well-worn book. It carried the smell of pine lake water and the faint woodsy trace of time. Inside the cabin, the kettle whistled low and slow. Edith, now 80, moved slower than she once had. Her gait had shortened, her breath shallowed after the pneumonia scare last winter. But her eyes, those storm-gray eyes, remained sharp as ever. They tracked the steam rising from her cup of chamomile tea as if it held memories, maps, or ghosts. The ducks still came each morning. Not all the same ones Maisie had passed. Two Toes had wandered off, but new ones came as they always did. They seemed to know the way now, down from the ridge, waddling single file toward the woman by the porch, who never forgot the grain. She fed them without words. She didn't need to say anything. The quiet, after all, was her first language, and in that quiet she had learned how to heal. On her writing desk lay an open journal, its spine-cracked pages feathered from years of ink and tears. Today's entry was short. It read, "I was stolen from, but I was never truly lost, because no one, not even someone you loved, can steal your will to begin again." She capped the pen and placed it beside the teacup. The clock on the wall ticked like a heartbeat, slow and steady. The sun dipped lower, throwing long fingers of light across the wooden floor. A lake shimmered outside, mirroring the pale orange sky, and the trees, brave, thin, defiant, held onto their last leaves like the final words of a long letter. Edith sat by the window, wrapped in her shawl, and let the warmth of the fire trace lines across her face. She hadn't returned to New York, not once. The city still sent her mail,
Sometimes notifications about policy changes, elder advocacy updates, an occasional letter from a student who'd read her case in class. But the apartment, the lawsuit, the press, all of it felt like a past life, like a dress that no longer fit, or a name called down a hallway where no one lived anymore. And she liked it that way. There were things she still did every day. She fed the ducks. She watered the rosemary by the window. She answered letters, though her handwriting had grown slower, more deliberate, like each word had to be earned. And she listened to the wind against the eaves, to the lake lapping against the dock, to the world not needing her but somehow still remembering. She was resting by the fire when the tape recorder clicked on. It was the same model Jack had given her years ago, the one she'd used to send a message to law students. It had a small, blinking red light that signaled it was live. She pressed play. Her own voice filled the cabin, not the frail one she used now, but the stronger, tempered voice from years earlier. From that day, she'd recorded the letter that made its way into classrooms, courtrooms, and conferences. I'm not in New York anymore. I don't have the apartment at 9F, but I have something better, freedom. And you, if you're listening, you deserve it too. She let it play all the way through. No edits, no regret. When it finished, she sat for a long time, listening not to the silence, but to what had always lived beneath it, peace. Outside, the sun was beginning its descent, its final act for the day, casting golden fire across the lake. The ducks floated silently in formation, their reflections broken only by the breeze. Edith stood. She walked to the porch and sat on the wooden bench. It creaked beneath her gently, like an old friend adjusting its arms to hold her just right. From here she could see the hills fold into each other, could smell the pine, could remember everything, not with pain but with purpose. She reached into the side table and pulled out one last journal. This one had a leather cover and a clasp. Inside were only a few entries, but they were the ones that mattered. The final page was blank. She took her pen. She wrote slowly, carefully. To whoever finds this. My name is Edith Marie Wells. I lived in Lower Manhattan. I was betrayed by someone I called family. But that is not how I end. I end here, in peace, with ducks, with a lake, with stories that were once nearly stolen but never silenced. If you are reading this, tell someone what happened to you, or listen when they tell you. There's no shame in surviving. There's only strength in naming it. She placed the pen down, closed the journal, and smiled, not because it was over, but because it had become hers again. As the screen fades to black, her voice speaks calm and unwavering. I am not in New York anymore. I do not live at 9F. I live in the pages you read, in the stories you dare to write, and in every voice that says this happened to me. The final image, a wide shot of the cabin, smoke rising gently from the chimney, ducks gliding across the lake like commas in an unfinished poem, then darkness, and on that darkness white text appears, based on true events. If you or someone you know is experiencing elder financial abuse, speak up. Your voice can be the beginning of someone else's freedom. The Edith Wells Foundation,